Namaste.
Welcome, everyone. This is, we're here just after the holiday of Thanksgiving. So it's a beautiful time of year, even though it's getting colder in our side of the hemisphere. So I'm excited and grateful, Thanksgiving, that we are here together and that Cape Town and South Africa has invited me. And I'll take this opportunity to also introduce future projects. I am coming to South Africa in January, February, and will be presenting in Johannesburg and then Cape Town again in person. So the plan for Johannesburg is a short presentation on Pluto in Aquarius, and then a whole immersive workshop on transits and solar arc and progressions, which is basically focusing on predictive techniques. And whoever participates in that workshop will also send some of their important events of their lives. So we're going to make it more personal. Obviously, we won't be able to go through all participants' charts, but it will be interactive and you will be able to learn about your charts as well. So that's the end of January, the weekend of the 28, 29. And then Cape Town, eclipses and planets in aspect to the nodes. So we know that eclipses involve the sun and the moon and how powerful they are. So what we'll study in this immersion is going to be a full day again, is going to look at the different planets in aspect to the moon, in aspect to the nodes, which can have a similar eclipse effect in our lives. And today's topic is on Saturn in Pisces, and we'll actually also see when that happens, when Saturn in Pisces will be on the nodes, because it's happening. So that's one. And maybe Michaela will want to speak about that later today. But then I would also want to introduce you and invite you to this free online workshop tomorrow. It's going to be very late where you are in South Africa, but you can get a recording. And it's about astrology in the Southern Hemisphere. We know that our current model was developed by our astrology ancestors in the Northern Hemisphere. So the way we cast a chart, the way it's designed with the MC, for example, in the chart representing the South, well, that's not the same if you're in the Southern Hemisphere. The MC is going to be North. So you probably know, being Southern Hemispherian yourselves, that these changes are happening. And so I take this opportunity with, I was born on the equator, but on the Southern Hemisphere side of the equator. Julia Simmers from Australia, a Southern Hemispherian, and then Gemini Brett, who is a really good astronomer, astrologer. We'll talk about what does change, what does not change with Southern Hemisphere charts. So, in order to sign up, you can either email me. The Zoom link is way too long for just posting it, but just contact me and I'll send you the information. You can also find this on Facebook on my page. I'll direct you to my page. It's called Evolutionary Skies. Evolutionary Skies on Facebook, and you'll see it here, and you'll have the links here in case you don't find me. Okay. So back to our slides. I'll take this down. A quick note on my books. If you're not familiar yet with them, check them out. And now let's dive deeper into our subject. Will the Johannesburg workshop be also online? I don't think so. Especially as you have load shedding, and it's really very detail oriented. It's very hard to do a hybrid of these conferences. The best we can do is maybe record it, but I'm not promising anything at this point. Just come, we'll make it really worth the while. So, a brief introduction. We're ahead of very strong ingresses next year, 2023. The first one will be Saturn moving into Pisces for almost 3 years. Those dates from March 7, 23 to February 13, 26 also include an ingress into Aries and then retrograde back into Pisces. So there are about 4 months of Saturn in Aries during 2025, and then moves completely out of Pisces on February 13, 2026, which is going to be very dramatic because Saturn is moving towards a conjunction to Neptune, and we'll also explore that. So, I was really looking forward to use the symbolism of the Capricorn, which is half a mountain goat and half a siren. So Capricorn actually has that water element, at least in its graphic. And Saturn moving into Pisces may reflect that. So how do we see that? How do we experience that? To me, the reason that Capricorn represents both the land, the mountain, as well as the oceans is maybe capturing on the fourth day of creation, when the biblical saying that God created the ocean and the land and separated waters from land. And so Capricorn and Saturn obviously represent the structure. They represent the foundational design. So the things that we rely on, the things that we build on, the foundation of the home, as well as the foundation of society. So in the physical, as well as cultural, moral guidance and references. And on our planet, the oceans have mountains and a whole topography and landscape. So we also know that most species evolved from the oceans to the land and then climbing up the mountains. So there's some kind of a development from the bottoms of the seas to the top of the mountain. And if we even, I believe that is also captured through the signs of Scorpio to Aquarius, where Scorpio has to do with going under, not necessarily oceans, but Scorpio has to do with the crevices, the underworld. And that's part of where the shadow work of Scorpio is being done. Then Sagittarius is about going up to surface and exploring the surface, the wide horizon. And so you're galloping on your horse and you are going far, far wide forward. And then the Capricorn starts to climb the mountain, and eventually the sea, the mountain goat reaches the top of the mountain. So there's an ascending movement from the underworld to the vast horizon of Sagittarius to the mountaintop, and the hierarchical development through Capricorn. And then Aquarius is the sky. You actually start to fly beyond the earth and reach for higher dimensions. So what we're doing with Saturn in Pisces may capture some of that motion from very early primal seed development of the Pisces, and then how this unfolds and we climb to the top of the mountain. So Saturn in Pisces, initially can seem contradictory, since Saturn is so earthy and so defined and looks for order, whereas compared to that, Pisces is nebulous, not clearly defined, and sometimes chaotic. And yet, from an evolutionary point of view, and which is the way I practice evolutionary astrology, we don't see any placement as better than another. Each placement has its shadows and its higher aspiration, higher expression. So there's always a lesson to learn. There's always a way to experience those transits, both in a malefic and benevolent way. So the planet in itself is neutral. It doesn't mean you any harm, but if you misuse it, then you suffer and you can experience crisis. But if you learn to understand its intention, then you align with that planet. And Saturn is, of course, all about alignment. So speaking of 2023, Saturn is the first one to change signs from Aquarius to Pisces, followed by Pluto moving into Aquarius for a short period of time by late March 2026. And that's going to be the beginning of a very long cycle of Pluto in Aquarius, about 20 years. And then Jupiter moves into Taurus in May 2023. So that is a shorter transit, but meaningful as well. So we have Jupiter is very close to the Earth now. And so it's racing forward through the signs, when just about 5 months into Pisces, moving back to Aries, just from January to May, quickly racing through Aries, and then spending about a year in Taurus. So when we learn about an ingress and a planet, we always want to learn about the environment, what else is going on in the sky. So this backdrop of Pluto in Aquarius, Jupiter in Taurus, then Uranus is still in Taurus. This is really interesting how Jupiter and Uranus are these high-minded planets, and they're in a very earthy sign of Taurus. And the very earthy Saturn is in a very high-minded, spiritual, ethereal Pisces. So there's something about this contrast of high-minded planet in these very low, denser signs, and vice versa.
Maurice, may I just cut in for a second? Your slide hasn't changed. Is that supposed to be, or have you moved on with other slides? We only see the beginning slide.
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm still showing the water goat.
Okay, good. We just wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay. So let's look back. Saturn was in Pisces, obviously every 28 to 30 years, we go back in time. The early 1900s, then, in the last 20th century, I think for those of us who are still alive, it's between 1935 to 1996. So Saturn first moved into Pisces in between 1935 and 1938, and these were really dramatic years, even though historically, we all know that the big change or the big crisis was when Saturn moved into Aries and World War II breaking. But Saturn in Pisces in the late 30s was a precursor to the Second World War. And, I'm just going to list the events first and then look at how, what are the themes that we're identifying here. So interestingly, a political climate that is quite unstable on the planet. And it wasn't wartime, but it was very tense. For example, if we speak about the Second World War, Hitler was gaining more and more traction. And this was also the time of the Berlin Olympics, which were very controversial, and many people, athletes, were boycotting it. Some the Jews were not allowed to participate, and yet they went on. They didn't cancel it, but it was kind of showing what's ahead. Interestingly, before we go to the Alcoholic Anonymous, it was also the death in England of King George V, and then the succession to his older son, Edward, who then abdicated the same year. And so the succession was eventually for George VI. So this whole, again, this change of leadership, but in a very clunky way. The fact that the succession was not smooth. First of all, a king died, which is a big deal in itself for a country, for a monarchy. But then the succession, is not guaranteed. It's clunky, and we see that the leader is not really standing up, taking the lead. He's actually quitting, which is very Piscean. I'd rather not do it. See ya. So the abdication in favor of, his marriage was during the Saturn in Pisces transit of the 30s. Very, descriptive of that. Two species went extinct were the Tasmanian tiger in Australia and the Bali tiger. Interesting, two tigers, even though the Tasmanian tiger is marsupial, it's not an actual feline. That's interesting as well, and sad, of course. Stalin, who was born with Saturn in Pisces in the 1800s, it goes through his great purge in the 30s after he gained power and kind of chased Trotsky out of the Soviet Union. So the Great Purge is basically a lot of people dead, for Stalin to kind of secure his dominion and eliminate any kind of opposition. So, you know, Hitler and Stalin are wrecking havoc. You know, they are causing a lot of chaos in their respective homeland. Not yet fully beyond their own borders. Famine in West China, really intensely so. A Spanish Civil War, a lot of unrest in Spain. And then, you know, in a Piscean entertainment industry, the innocence of Pisces, I can see, you know, kind of captured by the first long animated feature film. So before that, you had, you know, it's not the first anime, but it's the first long movie. So it's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which obviously has a lot to do with innocence and the loss of innocence, and the Seven Dwarfs representing different aspects of consciousness. In the 60s, 64 to 67, this was, and now I also want to highlight what was the astrological environment around then. You know, in the 1930s, Uranus was also in Taurus. And, you know, Neptune was in Virgo. So this is very important because these slow-moving planets mean that the whole time that Saturn was in Pisces, it opposed Neptune as well. It's kind of a double whammy. And this axis of Virgo Pisces being so activated and interchangeable. The United States, it was created with Neptune in Virgo. So there was a Neptune return with that Pisces, Saturn in Pisces opposition. In the 60s, Chiron was in Pisces, then Pluto-Uranus in Virgo. So that obviously sets the stage for really dramatic change in leadership and the cultural climate. You know, there's a social revolution. We know that the mid-60s were very tumultuous around the world. You know, there's a Vietnam War raging, and then you have the civil rights movement in the United States. African Americans starting to really push to change the laws, even though they're allowed to vote. There are so many restrictions, and racism. So this is the time where Martin Luther King is really being vocal and leading a movement. And again, it's right before his assassination. So Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in 1968. So right as Saturn moves into Aries from Pisces, you have this outburst of conflict for the second time. But here, as we say, Pluto, Uranus, in and of themselves are already, this powerhouses of change and shattering, existing foundations. So add to that an opposition to Pluto. It's a very, very intense concussion of planets. And at the same time as we have this civil rights movement, the first African-American actor wins an Oscar. Martin Luther King receives the Nobel Peace Prize. And then Mandela, in South Africa is going through the same intensity, fighting for regime change, fighting for justice and recognition of rights. So he was not arrested. He was arrested in 1962, but in 1964, he was charged, and that's when they gave him his sentence, to stay in prison for life. They were considering killing him, death penalty, but they compromised for life in prison. And so that's the beginning of his, or at least an important step in his activism as well. And is being sent to Robben Island. Then in January, in 94 and 96, so you have Uranus, Neptune in Capricorn, which you may say, for those of you who use modern rulers, is a mutual reception with Saturn in Pisces. So Saturn is in Neptune's sign, Neptune is in Saturn's sign. There's an amplification of that transit then. And then Pluto is in Scorpio on the North Node, particularly in 94. So interestingly, that Saturn cycle is when Mandela becomes president and the modern South African Republic, is it a republic? I hope I'm right, is established. So again, he was released from prison in 91, if I'm not mistaken, but he actually rose to power during Saturn in Pisces in 94. And that was, of course, the beginning of a whole new era. So it was the end of apartheid. It's a new regime. But then in Africa, there's this terrible climax of chaos and genocide in Rwanda between the Hutus and the Tutsi, which in itself leads, to this kind of implosion. Interestingly, you notice that most of the conflicts that we're seeing happening during Saturn in Pisces are internal conflicts. It's a civil war. It's internal politics. Something is happening internally that is causing instability. And in the worst case scenario, once Saturn moves into Aries, the risk is for the internal conflict to start, moving beyond the borders. Another interesting, sad and yet astrologically important transit, the singer of the band Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, commits suicide. And the reason I mention that is that he is a Saturn in Pisces born. So he was born in the earlier cycle of the 60s. In actually March, he was born in March 67, just as Saturn was at the tail end of Pisces. And he commits suicide on his Saturn just before his exact return with Saturn in Pisces again. And then on a positive side, there's peace between Israel and Jordan. That's a big deal because the region, the Middle East, is usually on fire. There's always some kind of battle burning, and defensive attitude and mistrust and tension. And here we see a gesture of reconciliation, and we see a change of tides. So what does that tell us? And what is happening as far as the climate of this next Saturn in Pisces cycle? The most important one, I believe, is that Neptune is in Pisces as well. So we are having Saturn in the sign of Pisces with the ruler in Pisces. There's this kind of Saturn-Neptune recurrence. When they were opposed in the 30s, they're now going to conjunct. However, Saturn and Neptune are going to get close to each other in Pisces, but the actual conjunction is at 0 Aries, which is probably the most important transits of our time, is the upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction. The other thing taking place is that in 2025-ish, the nodes also move to Pisces Virgo, which means that both Saturn and Neptune will be on the nodes in 25. And as you've heard me say about the Cape Town workshop next year, when planets are on the nodes, they dominate. So any planet that transits the lunar nodes, and not just their own nodes, each planet has their own nodes, and that's one story. But when the planet actually is on the lunar node, that planet becomes kind of the gatekeeper. They set the tone for the time that they're there. So it has this extremely massive influence, dominance over the climate in our personal lives and the greater collective. So it's something to really pay attention to when Saturn and Neptune are on the nodes, because whatever's building up during the Saturn in Pisces transit will be climaxing when Saturn is on the nodes, and it happens to be the south node. So what are the themes that we are examining here? Test of solidity and integrity, which, if you fail the test, can cause the collapse of leadership and regime. I want to spend some time on this one. one of the most difficult aspects for a leader is Neptune in aspect to Saturn or Pluto in aspect to Saturn. Neptune in aspect to Saturn, I know both these aspects, and I'm talking mostly about angular aspects, conjunctions, oppositions, and squares. So, of course, we're talking about Saturn and Neptune coming together in Pisces and Aries, but the fact that Saturn is in Pisces in itself is a test of integrity. And the reason is that any planet that enters Pisces is a planet, goes through a phase of dissolution, of ending. It kind of, it's the wave crashing. So the wave is emerging in Aries, separating from the ocean, and it climaxes, reaches its maximum height at a certain point in the cycle. And through Pisces, the wave collapses back into the ocean. So there's an end of a cycle and a beginning of a next cycle. So Pisces is a transitional time for any planet that, visits that part of the ecliptic. And so by nature, there's an elimination process. There's a purging process in Pisces where if you're not strong enough, if you're not on top of your game, you will be eliminated. So those who are not prepared, who are not conscious, who are not doing the work, or simply who are not present enough, can be made to disappear in a way that can take down those who take their position for granted and think that they're above it all and think that the crisis won't happen to them. So it's a time where the larger forces of nature are at play, and fate becomes stronger than free will. So think about these concepts. The fire signs, Aries and Leo and Sagittarius, are very much about free will. What do I want to do? What am I here? What are my choices? I'm in charge. I make the decisions. But when you reach the last part of the zodiac, when you reach the Capricorn and then Aquarius and the final sign of Pisces, there's no free will. It's all higher intervention, divine intervention, or simply the larger forces of nature in a very natural way. It's kind of the fact that we're all going to die. We have the free will to extend our life. Some of us can take more vitamins and live a little longer. But at the end, we will collapse back into the ocean. And so Saturn moving into Pisces is a test of credibility, because Saturn has to do with credibility. So are you still a leader? Are you still holding on to the reins? Is your sovereignty intact? And you will see that for some leader, this will be an opportunity to rise higher. We talked about the sea goat. Is this Saturn in Pisces going to take you back and recycle you into the ocean? Or are you going to be able to burst through the waves and make it to land and then ascend to the mountaintop? So you will see kind of a natural selection happening. during this time. And this is why it's a time that can lead to unrest, because the cracks are showing. The leaders are going to, show their vulnerabilities and their strength. It's a time where, like I said, the challenges are not merely human-made. There's a challenge of a higher order. It's like a hurricane comes to town, and you will see, I didn't mention those in those different transits, but if you look at the historical references, you will see that in each of these periods, the late 30s and the mid 60s and the mid 90s, there were all kinds of natural events of extreme proportions. Like, for example, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was in the 90s that there was a hurricane in the United States that lasted a month. So the storms were raging from the beginning of August to the end of to the beginning of September, like this kind of never seen before event. And you had these different natural occurrences that were excessive, that it was more than usual. So that's what I'm saying. Nature, natural cycles, fated events are at play during the Piscean phase. So this can, with this test, you can have a lot of uncertainty. Think about, the death of the king in England, George V, and then the succession of his son, who is not measuring up, who doesn't want to follow the protocols and is not interested. So you see again that he's not passing the test, and he's being basically sidelined, eliminated for someone who, is more appropriate and is more fitting to the role. So this is not only happening for transition of leaders, but it can happen internally with existing leaders. Sorry about that. Natural cycles, fate had me sneeze. So it can be, transits in Pisces can bring the end of an era. Now, Neptune's been in Pisces for a long time. So how do we experience that? So Neptune is not necessarily about a regime, but it definitely, think about the transit of Neptune in Pisces since 2011, and then it's going to stay there until 2026. So what happened as Neptune moved into Pisces, you had first of all, in a very symbolic way, in a very mythological way, just as Neptune moved into Pisces, there were a lot of end of the world scenarios. You had the Mayan calendar ending in 2012, and everybody was talking about, is it the end of the world? Which we knew it wasn't, but there's some kind of symbolism about this kind of mass consciousness, thinking about even the idea of the end of the world. But then the real end of the world is really gaining traction with climate change and the fact that we are now at 8 billion people on the planet. And you had activists like, you know, Greta Thunberg, the adolescent who was very active during this Neptune in Pisces transit, sounding the alarm that if we don't change our ways, this could be the end. This could lead to a collapse of infrastructure, and you know, the resources not being able to sustain us. So this Mayan calendar New Age symbolism ended up really transpiring into actual ecological facts, natural circumstances that bring our attention to the fact that our survival is not guaranteed. And with Neptune moving into Pisces, are we going to get recycled into the ocean? You know, is it the end of humanity as we are supposedly, you know, at our prime? So that in itself creates a general climate of possible end. And then, of course, the pandemic. You know, we obviously, astrologers, associate the pandemic with a Pluto Saturn conjunction that was definitely the activator that stopped the economy and stopped the function of every market on the planet. But the pandemic got global in March during the Pisces season, when the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune were all conjunct in Pisces. And so that you had this overreaching pandemic that could kill the world, that was a threat to the world. And it made us realize how vulnerable we are. It made us realize how our routines are vulnerable. You know, Virgo is the routine. Pisces is when your routine is thrown out of the window. So Pisces, you know, brings this wave that crashes on your sandcastles. And you suddenly realize, no, you're not going to work today, and you're not going to work tomorrow, and nobody's driving, and you're, you know, we don't know if there's going to be enough toilet paper for the next few weeks or forever. So you're in this time of uncertainty, and you see that fate, life could change, you know, there could be a twist and turn that is completely unexpected, coming from left field. So why I'm talking about Neptune is because it captures this essence of Pisces. And is it the end of the world? Probably not. I hope not. I hope, you know, we're going to have a second chance. But it is definitely an opportunity to not take anything for granted. Things could be recycled very, very quickly. Now, looking back at the previous Neptune in Pisces cycle in the middle of the 1800s, you had a lot of migrations, and the new world of the United States gaining more prominence. But at the same time, this was the precursor to the Civil War in the United States in the 1800s. So as soon as Neptune moved into Aries, the Civil War broke. So always keep in mind that Saturn, you know, Pisces and Aries are the sign that represent chaos and creation. So out of the chaos of Pisces, you have a new emergence of Aries. And sometimes the new emergence of Aries has to happen through a battle to determine who the new leader will be, what the new system will be. So there's something new being birthed through Aries. And we can have, you know, a very peaceful transition where, you know, there's a natural dissolution and then there's a natural emergence through Aries, but it often happens through chaos and creation. Excuse me, chaos and battles. So Pisces kind of creates the unrest. Pisces takes down the leaders who cannot measure up, and it shakes the foundations of our lives and the systems in order to bring, hopefully, better systems. And in order, you know, as nature goes, Aries represents the birth, and birth often begins as a battle. Just like the baby has to push and struggle in order to get out of the womb and say, I'm here and I made it. There's always, nature always tests who has got what it takes. So you have to prove yourself. You have to prove your vitality. You have to make sure you're not going to be stillborn, and that you will prevail against the contrarian winds and obstacles and adversities. So it's not just because Aries is, you know, a warmonger. It's a larger cycle. It represents that need to validate, justify the fact that we deserve to exist. Prove to me that you deserve to exist. So it doesn't have to be always a conflict. And if we look back, you know, the previous Saturn in Pisces, you know, was not met by, you know, some kind of terrible conflict afterwards. So, yes, there was a genocide and there were internal conflict in Rwanda, which basically led to the rebirth of Rwanda. And we know that now Rwanda is one of the most successful African stories, how that country, you know, emerged from the ashes to start a completely new cycle following the you know, this kind of implosion and chaos. So that's sometimes how nature works, how the universe works. And so what can we, you know, anticipate is this is a time where you can have leaders exposed in scandals, where, you know, you're going to see fraud, you're going to see all kinds of things that happen behind the scenes. And those you thought were reliable, you know, those you thought were trustworthy, can suddenly be exposed in their weakness, in their vulnerability, in their lack of integrity. But then those who do measure up through Saturn in Pisces can be better leaders, can emerge from this chaos as either new leaders or the existing leader starting a new chapter. You know, I don't want to be, you know, like idealistic and say that only the good people will win, because life is always a mixed bag. You have a little bit of good and you have a little bit of toxic components. But it is some kind of reshuffling. So in a positive way, those who take the higher road with Saturn in Pisces can be those who dissolve rigidity, dissolve adversity, the same way that the early 90s, so the end of apartheid. So Leclerc was softening his stance and starting to legitimize Mandela. And that happened before Saturn moved into Pisces, but it happened during a Saturn-Neptune times. You know, the moment de Klerk saw the Berlin Wall collapsing during Saturn-Neptune, he understood that there's something of a larger nature here. And it kind of influenced him to reach out and start softening the stance, the apartheid regime, you know, rigidity, and see that it's not working, that it needs to be recycled, that there's no future in that. It's not sustainable. And so once Saturn moved into Pisces, you had the emergence of Mandela as a leader who was very well loved and who managed to also maintain peace and not let the rage and the you know, the war that could have happened as Saturn moved into Aries. You know, Mandela managed to navigate those storms and waters in a way where the new birth that followed was not traumatic and was not violent and didn't have to happen through, you know, a fight. So that's where free will does linger in, and you do have a choice. You know, we don't have to learn the hard way. We still have to learn the lesson. And hopefully, the same will happen with us in this time. So there is a nature of forgiveness and flexibility and grace. And the reason is that, again, when Saturn moves into Pisces, and this is true for people born with this as well. Like if you are one of the folks who has Saturn in Pisces, or even Saturn, Neptune, Saturn in the 12th house, you can be a person who initially feel like you have no role model in this world, that your parents were either too busy or even maybe too permissive. You know, Saturn in Pisces can be the parent who says, yeah, you don't have to do your homework, do whatever you want. Like there's an element of permission that is sometimes coming from neglect, from inattention to details, and a feeling that you don't really know the rights and wrong. You can be, on the one hand, feeling like, great, the teacher's not coming to school today. You know, the leader, the teacher, the mentor, the parent is not showing up. Pisces, I'm free. I can do whatever I want. So Saturn in Pisces can create this absence of Saturn, like there's no Saturn in place, and so the space is vacant, and the kids are having a blast and running in, you know, outside the classroom and going to the beach instead of sitting down and writing down their homework. And it can create this sense of, yeah, we're doing whatever we want. We're not confined. We're not told what to do. But over time, Saturn in Pisces creates this feeling that, okay, what happens after the beach? You know, is the teacher coming tomorrow or next week or next month? Or are we left with no leadership? And so at some point, people born with Saturn in Pisces can feel that they don't have a role model, that they don't have guidance, that their understanding of rights and wrong is misguided and leads to making bad decisions. So think about, 1935 Alcoholic Anonymous being created, because it's if you don't have leadership, you could end up in all kinds of excesses and abuses and drink too much and party too much and never show up for work. So you kind of start to develop all kinds of dysfunctions because no one is there to bring you back into alignment, to tell you that finishing whiskey over whiskey is not going to be, good for you ultimately. So there can be a sense of disorientation, and you will see people born with Saturn in Pisces, they reach that stage in their lives where they can be lost. They don't even know they're lost, but they are. And so deep down, they will crave for a mentor to show up. They will yearn for someone to tell me what to do and to fix my problems and to get me to rehab. And this is why many folks born with this signature can go through the motions of becoming very religious, because religion gives them laws, directives. You eat this on the Sabbath, you fast, in Easter, you dress this way, you have all kinds of rituals and guidelines, very Saturnian ways to kind of give you a sense of order and values and what are your priorities. So quite often the Saturn in Pisces folk move from being in this loose, no mentor, no parent guidance, to a very rigid, tell me what to do, obedience and submission. So this is something that can happen on a global level as well, where we see our leaders deflated, tested. Some will prevail and become the great leaders. Some will be recycled and decompose into the greater whole. And then we're going to crave for, wait a minute, we're lost. We need to be found again. We need someone to tell us what to do. And then comes Saturn in Aries. Bang. Clear, order, and very firm about it, because we need that order. So you can have with Saturn in Pisces this kind of dichotomy between depravity, the absence of Saturn, people over drinking, people lying, people manipulating, deception, versus those who rise to the higher frequency of Saturn, to the more spiritual Pisces, the more spiritual nature of Saturn, where you don't have order that comes from personal opinion, but you have a wiser sense of order, a more universal, a more global understanding, which is not order, it's wisdom. So Saturn in Pisces takes order from God, not humans. And I'm saying that literally. It can get religious. It can be also spiritual and a spiritual awakening, but it can also be that there is a mentor in your life who represents this spiritual wisdom. I mean, I remember last cycle of Saturn moving into Pisces, that is when, you know, I was involved with astrology already. And I went through this period of complete dissolution, and I found my astrology mentor. You know, right as in the beginning of '94, and it provided me with a completely new understanding and guidance, and life started to make sense because I dumped what society expected me to do, and I found what my true spiritual purpose was through the help of a mentor. And that can happen in this transition of Saturn in Pisces, is that the material order dissolves and the seeds for a spiritual order become irrelevant. Now, I know we're coming to the tail end of our talk. I just want to show you some charts. So this is February 2025. When you see Saturn is going to be at the tail end, towards the end of Pisces, the last decan, and Neptune will be on the north node, excuse me. So both Saturn and Neptune are going to be on the north node during this whole year, which means again that all the things we talked about are going to become more dominant, more apparent, stronger. So look at that new moon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 planets in Pisces around the north node in Pisces. It's pretty interesting. Then in the summer of 2025, Saturn and Neptune move into Aries for a very short time. They retrograde back to Pisces. Saturn retrogrades back to Pisces. So you have 2 conjunctions of Saturn, Neptune. One of them is in July 25, but they are not exactly conjunct to the degree. There's a half-degree orb at one Aries. So they're just at the tail, almost touching each other, and then Saturn retrogrades, and so they don't conjunct. But then the actual touch ground is going to be in February 26, 2026. So, this is a cycle that requires, a whole other lecture. But I just want to move forward into our current time and context. First of all, realize that many leaders are born with Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. It is one of the strongest leadership aspects. Saturn in Pisces, Saturn-Neptune, very, very common. So you see 3 of the most venerated leaders in the United States, Roosevelt, JFK, and Lincoln, all born with this cycle. And then less venerated, Putin, and then Mitterrand and Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, born with this in their chart. So you can anticipate that Putin is going to go through a huge, huge test during Saturn in Pisces and then the new conjunction, because the Soviet Union and Russia is immediately linked to the Saturn-Neptune aspect cycle. We can almost, I won't say guarantee because there's never a guarantee, but we can expect a new Russia by 2026. You know, this kind of unrest and chaos will affect Putin and will likely destabilize him. And the same is happening today in China. And Xi, the absolute leader of China, is facing the first revolt, the first protest of its kind these days in China. And Xi is also born in 1953 with a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So his vision of being a leader for life will be challenged, whether he's going to die, and it's really going to be perpetuity, or he's going to be deposed. So we can expect these leaders who are born with Saturn, Neptune to be challenged. Last chart, South Africa. So I want to touch on something before I lead to the chart, but when a planet moves to a new sign, it always moves to that new sign when the sun is nearby. This is why Saturn moves into Pisces in the month of March, because the sun is in Pisces as well. So usually the planet moves to a new sign when the sun is in a neighboring sign, in the same sign, within a sextile distance at maximum. And this means that this planet has an audience with the king before it moves into the new sign. And so you always need to look at the time when the actual conjunction of the planet is with the sun, even if it's before, as it is this time. The conjunction with the sun will happen at the end of Aquarius. So the sun will move into Pisces and Saturn will later move into Pisces. So think about it symbolically as though, again, Saturn prepares its ingress into Pisces, and there's an audience with the king, with the sovereign, around the middle of February, and that's when the intentions are set for that next cycle. So pay attention to February 16, what kind of activation are happening that time. Now, if we look at the actual conjunction in the sign of Pisces, between the sun and Saturn, the first one that will happen will be the following year at 9 Pisces, and that happens to be South Africa's Saturn return. So Saturn is again having an audience with the king, the sun, and it's a Saturn return for the country. So we can expect that time, 2024, February 2024, to be very, very meaningful for load shedding and leadership, and who is going to basically pass the test of leadership in South Africa. So I hope this gives you food for thought. Let's see if you have any questions. We can take them now.
All right. Thank you, Maurice, for a very detailed, long presentation on Saturn in Pisces and all its signatures.
Thank you.
So yes, the floor is open. Anybody here in the room perhaps wanting to ask a question, if I may ask first? Anybody here? No?
Maybe we should just.
Yes, we can do that. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you.
You will see us on February the 12th in person.
February the 12th in person.
In this
for the
lovely
first
space.
time after the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's a great privilege to be back to South Africa.
We're looking forward to that. And so I'd like to take the moment just to introduce that we will be having your workshop here at my house, where we are today gathered, where we have plenty of space for a nice big group. And we do hope that many of you will join us. It's already on our website, and we shall be sending out details shortly. So yeah, thank you, Maurice. We look forward to hosting you here in February on this
Beautiful.
April time.
And tomorrow, I think it's going to be a great talk for all of you Southern Hemispherians. Join us online for this talk. Thank you again.
Thanks for all the information. I see we're all back on screen. So yes, I open the floor to anybody now wanting to ask a question. Yes, there, please,
Okay,
Karen.
I can come here. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Michaela. She has this beautiful guest house, and she's so graciously, I'm staying here right now, and so she's planning to have, this is where it will be held, and there is a comment, but it just thank you for your graciousness.
My pleasure. It's lovely having you.
Space. We're 5 minutes from the beach.
Thanks.
It's a most gorgeous space, and so this is basically going to be the home of the CAA.
As well, yeah.
For live meetings. Look forward, because Shambhala is only open at the end of the year, possibly. It's huge construction works. Yeah. So just a huge
thank you, Karen. And perhaps
to say, Maurice, it was fantastic.
And so astrologers are always talking about the stars, but then what's the food going to be like?
What the food?
That's going to be the most important question.
Oh, I shall send you the picture. I can tell you what's the food like today. Are you happy with the catering? Yes. Delicious. There we go. I just wanted to say, Karen and I took the time yesterday to move the CAA library here as well. So we've got the library set up here. So when you do come here, it will have all those aspects as well. Okay.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you. Take over and ask your questions. Oops. Okay, that was a quick goodbye. Sorry.
Who disappeared?
Who disappeared now? Where's
Maurice?
I'm sure
hello?
he'll come back.
He's gone.
Maurice disappeared.
He'll come back.
Was that on purpose now? Or was it a mistake?
It sounded like we were ending. So
Yeah.
No, we wanted to ask questions. Oh, my dear. Can we get him back? Elena, can you send see you here? Can you send please a message?
I'm so sorry. I arrived late. I've been out to lunch. I am absolutely devastated because you know what Maurice means for me, and he will be in Johannesburg in January, at the end of January. So I wanted to talk about that, but hey, you know, I see he's already put something up. And we'll be talking about Pluto in Aquarius, which will be a very important, March is an extremely important month with so many shifts happening. And then a workshop the next day on the predictive cycles. I can't remember what you're having down in Cape Town as your workshop.
It's the nodes.
Oh,
We're
the
having
nodes.
nodes.
Absolutely fantastic. That is really one of Maurice's best things. And I think you'll very much enjoy that. It's a very interesting way of looking at the nodes. So yeah, it's a shame we've lost Maurice there.
We're trying to get him back. Perhaps in the meantime, do you want to send in the chat box your questions anyway? So even if we should not get him back,
I don't have too many questions because unfortunately I just came in 5 minutes ago. I couldn't leave the place, and I kept sort of saying, you know, I have to go. But you know, sometimes there's a very fine line in being rude as well. So I haven't been able to leave until now.
That's fine, Eleanor. That's fine. But let's see who's got questions on the floor, please.
You know, coming from a traditional point of view, the question I would like to discuss is with Saturn in Pisces now, the traditional ruler is Jupiter in Aries. And I think that's going to be a little bit of, you know, the chaos in structure, creating a need to expand with some action. You know, this is what's kind of triggering me a little bit. I don't know how you guys feel.
Which makes a lot of sense in terms of, you know, 3 weeks later, the Pluto moving into Aquarius. So yeah, very much so. That will definitely be one of the themes, I think, and one of the expressions that should be coming through and forth.
I mean, I know Jupiter has been in Pisces now, which has also created a bit of chaos. He is the ruler and he's enjoying sort of not really facing reality. And also in a big way, deceiving, a lot of deception. He's very clever at that. During the retrograde, but as he goes into Aries, he's leaving Pisces and moving into Aries. And then Saturn will come into Pisces being ruled by this Jupiter in Aries. Saturn has to listen to Jupiter in Aries. And what is that going to mean? Because I mean, as Maurice says, it is about a rebirth in a way, and perhaps Saturn in Pisces is bringing structure and discipline into the chaos. And the Jupiter is saying, and we've got to do something new. And what's interesting is now when you see that the procession of the one king dying and then the other king abdicating and then the new king, who was Queen Elizabeth's father, and now Queen Elizabeth has passed, and now be getting the introduction of Charles coming in. That's going to be an interesting story.
And how interesting that he comes in with an incoronation the day after an eclipse of a new moon. And you think, but how do you do that? Do they not have astrologers in England? You want to go and shake the English astrologers and say, guys, has nobody and none of you doing anything to approach and say something? You know, at least the Americans are very outspoken and they get out there and they do. But how do you do? He's not going to last very long, I don't think, coming in on the day after an eclipsed moon. The day after, the day before, I can't remember. He's on the 6th and the eclipse is on the 5th, if I remember, or the other way around. Well, the other way around would be terrible if he was the day before. I
can see a Scorpio, so it might be.
I think it was on the 8th.
And the 8th was the eclipse.
Yeah, the 8th it was the eclipse.
Yeah, the 8th.
In April, in May, sorry. On the 5th
of May, 2023.
Because that when he's having the coronation.
Yes, coronation's on the 5th.
On the 6th.
Yes, the 5th, okay. And that will be an eclipse. That will be an eclipse of the moon, and it's going to be in Scorpio at 14 degrees.
Yes. And there's no light. It's a brand new moon. It's so brand new that there's no light. There's no nothing. The sun, which is the king anyway, is eclipsed. Yes. And how do you do that? Yeah.
Right.
You know,
Sorry,
something that was.
It's gonna be interesting.
I think he's gonna be there very soon.
Sorry, if I may.
But also with the Saturn Pisces, look, I didn't hear everything that Maurice said, but with Saturn Pisces, I think there's going to be a lot coming up to do with illness, and maybe it'll be the first people who show more, how can I say, valid proof of either vaccine problems or the stress problems of the last 2 years. So there could be an increase on that level. I'm sorry I missed most of the talk. I'm
Well,
really
you can
sorry.
listen to it on the video.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Laura,
Okay. All right.
if I may say, we've had the ride of Jupiter in Aries for 2022. Jupiter moved into Taurus in May 2023. So we're sort of at the culminating. It's the first quarter of 2023. And we have to pay attention to relative to your Jupiter, dispositor. So
Yeah, the thing is, I think there's going to be quite a tumultuous time as Saturn moves into Pisces, because that Jupiter is racing, going much faster than normal, than his normal speed through Aries. So
Actually, very short, Lauren. Can you check how long? Can you just remind us how quick Jupiter goes through Aries? Because it is quick, yeah.
Yeah, Jupiter will move through Aries. He enters into Aries
20th
in January.
No, December 30th. December
One
20th.
person at a time, please. One person at a time. Thank you.
Okay, so I will talk. You asked me, so I will talk. The 21st of December, he goes into Aries. He rushes through Aries. Then he goes faster than his normal daily speed. Then on the 18th of May, he goes into Taurus, and he will stay in Taurus right up until, he stays in Taurus right up until crikey May again. So his timing in Aries isn't very long.
Yes, exactly.
And so that I'm just worried about the beginning of the year. And that is going to be quite a tumultuous time, I think. I think we're going to see a lot of change. You just take a look at politics, which Jupiter is about. And you see what's going on in England, one prime minister after the other. I don't even believe this new one is going to last either. And you see what's going on in the USA. Now, I mean, Trump thinking he can come back.
No. He launched this thing on a Mars retrograde, squaring Neptune. Hello. Think again.
So, I mean, it's very angry.
Right.
I think it's going to be an angry time. And I think we're going to, with that Jupiter in Aries, it's about, we're going to have to think of the new things that are a lot more focused, new birth, as Maurice says, this Saturn in Pisces that has no boundaries, ruled by this Jupiter in Aries, says now dissolve the structure so we can get ready to put something new in. And I think we're going to see a lot of us are going to be very disappointed in certain martyrs that we have had, and certain leaders and rulers and those that we have looked up to might fall off their pedestals in this phase. And we might be wanting and looking, and perhaps with Jupiter in Aries, and say perhaps we need to own our own voice as well.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. That was a lovely summary of that. And we are still going to continue here with a bit of get together and library browsing. So I think since Maurice has unfortunately left us, there are no specific other questions. If there are, please type them in the chat box, and then we can always see if we can get any answers. And otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the Sunday. Thank you for all logging in. Sorry about the short Q&A that has happened as it has. Anybody still anything? It's my pleasure. Still any comments from anybody out in the room who hasn't had a chance to say anything? No?
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for being here. And hopefully we can have these combination meetings more often. It's really nice getting together like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Super. Have a wonderful Sunday. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.